Welcome, listeners. Here's your gateway to the darkest corners of the human psyche. Immerse yourself in bone chilling tales of terror, each story meticulously narrated to send shivers down your spine. From haunted houses to sinister creatures lurking in the shadows, every episode promises to leave you on the edge of your seat. Join us, if you dare, and let your darkest fears come to life. Subscribe now and become a part of the nightmare. There's something under our feet. I was one of the engineers working on the Kola Superdeep Borehole, the deepest man-made hole on Earth. The project began in 1970 with the aim of studying the structure and composition of the Earth's crust. We hoped to get as far as the mantle, the layer just below the crust, but we never did. What happened that day changed my life forever. It was a cold December morning in 1992. And we were about to reach a record depth of 12,262 meters. The drill was working normally, drilling through the rocks with incredible force. We were monitoring the data and signals coming from the hole, when suddenly we heard a strange sound that resonated through the hole. It was like a scream from something alive, but it wasn't human. It was a high-pitched, tearing sound that made our hair stand on end. It felt like something was hurting down there, and it didn't want us to go on. The drill refused to work after that. It stopped spinning and started making a warning noise, as if it had encountered insurmountable resistance. We were scared and confused. What could have caused that sound? What was down there? We decided to bring the drill to the surface to see if there were any technical issues or any damage to the parts. It took hours to pull the drill through the steel cable, and when we finally got to see the tip of the machine, we were shocked by what we saw. The drill was covered with a whitish, slimy goo that oozed down the metal and down the handle, and there were also some remains that looked like pieces of meat, torn and bloody, stuck to the drill. It looked like the drill had pierced something alive, something big and horrible. But what kind of creature could live at that depth and temperature? We didn't know what to do. We had no explanation for that. We didn't know whether to continue the project or abandon it. We didn't know whether to report what happened or hide it. It didn't take long for those responsible to make a decision, to seal the well with a heavy metal cover on a concrete floor, sealing it with a ring of thick bolt. They said the project was halted due to lack of funds and scientific interest amid the chaos of post-Soviet Russia. But I knew it was out of fear, afraid of what was down there, afraid of what we had awakened, afraid of what might come out of the hole. I never knew what really happened that day. I never knew what that thing that screamed in the hole was. I never knew if it was dead or alive, if it was single or part of a colony, if it was natural or artificial. I moved to another country and tried to forget what happened. But sometimes I still have nightmares about that sound, that horrible scream that echoes in my mind. I wonder if whatever it was is still down there. I wonder if it's still alive. I wonder if it's still angry. But despite all the fear I felt at the time, now it's back in full force. Recently, I learned that the Japanese want to launch themselves in this endeavor. I wonder what they'll find down there, and if it'll be even more terrible than what we found. I just hope they know what they're doing, because I'm afraid that knowing the unknown can lead us down a path of no return. The hitchhiker. I could have flown home, but I thought a drive would clear my head. I'd just finished 4 years in the Marines, 4 of the messiest years of my life. I had made the mistake of bringing my new wife to California with me, and returned from Iraq to find her warming someone else's bed. The bed in question was of a fellow Marine, someone left on base while I fought and bled for my country. After 6 months of staying on base so I could meet with lawyers and finish my divorce, I was officially out and done. When I told my dad that I was going to rent a car and drive home, he understood. I told him I needed to come back slow so I could clear my mind, and he told me to drive safe. Take your time, kid. "We'll be here when you get back," he said, and I took him up on it. I was coming cross country, California to Tennessee, and I was seeing the sights and taking in the local flavor. I had decided to make this a long overdue vacation. I did a lot of thinking on that trip, but my only mistake was picking the kid up. I was driving through Oklahoma, enjoying the sights and feeling like I could watch the hills and valleys roll by forever, when I saw the kid standing there with his thumb out. He was young, couldn't have been old enough to enlist, despite his army coat. It was July, the heat stifling, but he was wearing fatigues and a service jacket that looked antique. A breeze ruffled his hair, pushing it back in a harsh puff that made me think of kids blowing on dandelion fluffs. Maybe it was the jacket, or maybe it was the look of naked want on his face. But I pulled up beside him and rolled the window down. "Hey kid, you need a lift." He turned his perfect sky blue eyes to me, and I'll never forget his words. I sometimes hear them in my sleep. "I sure do. Can you give me a lift to McMahon, mister? God will thank you if you do." I thought that was a little weird, but I told him to climb in, and he did so gladly. The signs told me McMahon was about 30 miles up the road, and I expected the kid to chatter like a squirrel the whole way. To my surprise, he was quiet. His eyes closed and his head bowed for the first couple of minutes. It took me a second to realize he was praying, and when he finished, he sat up and plastered a half-daffy grin on his face. "God tell ya I was a straight shooter?" I asked, more to break the ice than anything. He said to thank you for your assistance. "Mister, you will be greatly rewarded in his kingdom." I nodded, thinking I could use all the help I could get. The farther we drove, the more I began to suspect that something was off about the kid. He stared forward the whole way, his blue eyes on the horizon, and his mouth seemed set in an eternal grin. He wasn't as young as I'd thought, maybe 18 or 19, and the jacket had the name Harris stenciled on it. It was covered in patches too, the kind you get for service, and I was glancing at one on his left breast when I saw the bulge under the coat. I felt a cold shudder run through me as I recognized it. The kid was packing. "You look a little young for the service, kid," I said, trying to dissuade some of my fears. "Your brother give you that jacket? Was he in Iraq like me?" "My dad left it to me when he died," the kid said matter-of-factly. "Sorry to hear that. Was he in Iraq?" "The Gulf War," he said, his voice not matching the grin. "He enlisted before it started and was there for a couple years after it ended." I nodded. I bet he had some stories. I was in. I had been about to start on one of my sandbox tales, but the kid cut me off suddenly with the last thing I expected. "Do you believe in God, mister?" I blinked, the subject unexpected. "Not really, kid," I answered, being honest. "I'm an atheist. I've been ever since what happened to me overseas. I think that if there is a God, it's pretty crummy of him to let us live here like this." I had expected a fight, but the kid just nodded. "He forgives you for that. Daddy was like you," Mama said, "before he went to war. He saw something over there, bad things, and he came back from the war looking for God. He said he had seen some things over there that scared him and made him want to be better, and he couldn't do better without some help. So he came back and started looking for a purpose, and he found one. He found a lot of people offering purpose, but only one who delivered. By the time I was born, he was part of the family." I listened politely, not wanting to interrupt the kid, but the way he was talking about his dad's search for God made me a little concerned. It didn't seem like a happy memory. I was born into the family. Father Marcus was our everything, our teacher, our preacher, our second father, and our salvation. He brought lots of people together, lots of lost people, but that wasn't enough. Father Marcus wanted more. He had plans, big plans, but they wouldn't turn out be so good for us. He was quiet for a minute, looking out the glass and seeming lost in thought. I thought again that he had to be a kid, couldn't be out of high school, but maybe it was just whatever was wrong with him. Even though his eyes looked like he was in the worst pain imaginable, he still wore that plastered-on grin that never reached those eyes. He was like a doll with a troubled owner, a doll that smiles through its destruction. When I was 10, Father Marcus told the congregation that the end times were coming. He told them that the government was going to come down and take everything that we had built here, that the devil was set against us, and we needed to escape. He told everybody to sell their things, bring the bare minimum, and come to a place that he had found. It was a farm on the outskirts of town, a big farm that had once been a dairy. They gave him their money so that he could secure their paradise, free from anything that the government or the devil or anybody else might do, and came there to start their new lives. We were hopeful that this would be our paradise, but it wasn't a paradise. In the end, it was a prison. I felt a chill run up my spine as he said that. I wanted to tell him to stop. I didn't want to hear the end of it, but instead, I just listened. The kid was hurting, that was clear enough, but his story was so captivating. It was like one of those true crime stories, the ones so bad that you just know it has to be true. I kept my eyes on the road and listened, just letting him tell it, already knowing that it wouldn't have a happy ending. We were basically his slaves. We worked in the fields. We took care of the animals. We kept the big house where he lived and did his bidding. Father Marcus came down to spit the hellfire every night and to pass down new edicts and rules. Men were not permitted in the big house. No one but Father Marcus could lay with a woman, even within a marriage. All children were Father Marcus's children, but his actual children were special. Eventually, he took all the women that he liked up to the house to populate the earth. He took my sister up there with him, and we never saw her again. People didn't like it much, but what could they do? Father Marcus was keeping us safe from the apocalypse, right? So we followed his orders until everything fell apart. We rolled into the outskirts of McMahon then, the farms and barns making me think of the place the kid was talking about. I wondered, suddenly, where we were going, and why the kid wanted to go to McMahon so badly. Every mile felt like an eternal march, and I was dreading coming to the end of the journey. Where? I started, but the kid seemed to be expecting my question. Stay on the main road, mister, he said, clearing his throat before going on. He seemed as dry as an old stick, and when I reached behind the seat and offered him a Coke from the cooler, he took it with a smile. I wondered why I had done that. I didn't want the kid to go on, but in a way I did. I needed the end of it. I needed to know how it had all shook out. I was a curious bastard, it seemed, and I needed to see the bodies in this kid's path. Then one day, he gathered us in the barn and told us that the end was near. He told us we needed to prepare ourselves to go, because we were meeting God tonight. He gave us all something to drink, something in a red cup that his wives dipped out, and we all drank it. No one argued, no one fought him. We were all so brainwashed that we would have jumped in front of the 6:15 train that ran near the farm if he'd asked. Everyone drank, everyone obeyed, and everyone went to sleep. They stayed asleep too, except me. I woke up in the hospital with tubes in my arms and my wrists secured to the bed. The police were there, one of them waiting in the room with me, and they had questions. It turned out that they were the ones who had been coming, not God. They had arrived to find everyone dead, fallen around the barn like dolls, but had managed to get there in time to save me. I don't know why I lived while everyone else died, and it ate me up for a long time. Father Marcus, my family, everyone was gone, and I had been left behind. No one wanted anything to do with me. My dad had burned a lot of bridges before we went into the family, and none of them wanted to take in a moody 16-year-old who'd just been through hell. So I went into the system. going from group home to group home until a couple weeks ago. I clutched the wheel hard, suddenly very worried about what we might find in McMahon. The town was coming up now, a nice old brick town that looked downright picturesque. We passed a sign for a new mega church, the Sunrise Gospel House, and there was a smiling old guy beaming down from the front. The kid shot a glare at him and patted his heart, inevitably patting the piece as well. I suddenly wondered who was in McMahon that this kid needed to see. I was watching TV in the group home, and an ad came on for a church. The church had recently acquired its own network, and the pastor of the church was very familiar. He spoke about peace and God's love, but all I could hear was the voice that told us to drink the juice and go meet God. As I watched him smiling and hugging people, I heard a very different voice in the back of my mind. It was God, the real God, and he told me what I had to do. He said I needed to be his sword, and I needed to cleave the unrighteous from his midst. He patted the gun again, whispering a prayer to God, and my hair stood up on the back of my neck as something strange wafted from the kid. At that moment, he felt very righteous. We were well into town now, rolling up Main Street, and he told me to stop. I dropped the kid off at the light, and he thanked me, saying he could make it from here. He gave me a real smile then, not the doppy one he'd been wearing the whole way through his sad little tale, and waved at me. God bless you, mister. I'm off to do his work. Then he was gone, and I sat there watching him go until someone politely honked behind me, and I was forced to roll along. I wasn't sure what to do as I made my way out of town. Did I tell someone? If this pastor had really messed the kid up like that, then maybe he had it coming. Was that really my call to make, though? In the end, I called the McMahon Police Department and told them what I suspected. I told them about the kid and the story he had spilled, but I don't think they took me seriously. The dispatcher seemed like the report was going in a little pile of crackpot shit, but I felt I had done my due diligence. I was still thinking about it when I stopped for the night, wondering where the kid was and what he was doing as I drifted off to sleep. I woke up the next day and turned on the news to see that Pastor Michael Wheeler of the Sunrise Gospel House had been shot in front of his congregation. The pastor, someone wanted by the FBI for his alleged connection to several past cults, had been shot by someone from one of his past religious orders. The kid was in custody, but police were already saying he was mentally unwell, and this was likely a retaliation slaying. Police were still looking for a mysterious caller who had tipped them off before the shooting, surety, and they had many questions for that individual. I left Oklahoma as quickly as I could, flinching every time I saw a cop. That was a couple of years ago, and I've never told anyone what happened on that trip home. It's something that's weighed on me since I let that kid out on Main Street, and I can only imagine that he was right about God blessing me. I came back, found a job that paid well, met the love of my life, and settled into wedded bliss fairly easy. It all seemed very easy while it was happening, and I can't help but wonder if a little divine direction had something to do with it. As long as he doesn't point me at his enemies like he did that kid, I suppose we can be square. The monster in the woods. We all heard about stories about monsters in the woods. This is my story about my experience with a monster. Back when I was a child some 20 years ago, I lived in a town called Innsbruck, located in Virginia. There was this blonde lady in her 40s. Her surname is Williams, and she had an ice cream shop. Her ice cream shop was the best. In particular, the strawberry ice cream was her specialty. Amongst all the ice cream, the strawberry one was made the best. She told us that she used natural unsprayed strawberry from a farmer and a organically fed cow, which is why the strawberry one was in particular so good. She told us that she used organically fed cow milk for her ice cream, and whenever she had some extra milk laying around, she would gift the bottle to one of us kids. She was a nice lady. I remember that day, Friday, when she told us about the monster in the woods. Kids, beware. Don't go into the woods. There is a monster who looks beautiful like the sun out there, waiting to snatch men and boys alike. She had a serious look on her face. She wasn't joking, and we the kids would listen to her advice and not go into the woods whenever she warns us. One day on a Friday, Timmy came running towards me and the other boys. He was visibly shook and scared, his eyes wide, and he told us, "I saw the monster, I saw the monster." The monster had yellow fur all over the body. I saw the monster's back, it was all furry. We comforted Timmy the best we could. We asked him where he saw the monster. He told us near the abandoned cabin in the woods. That night, me and the boys decided to investigate the cabin and find the monster. We traveled half an hour on our bikes, and we found the cabin. The cabin was in a bad state, but we entered anyways. I hoped that a loose piece of wood wouldn't fall on my head or to any other boy's head. We shined our flashlights all around the cabin, and after 5 minutes of search, I heard a commotion behind me. I looked back and saw that Julius placed his hand on Mark's mouth, and that Mark had wide eyes. I looked towards where Mark was staring and saw a hand hanging out of the closet. Julius then said to Mark, "Look behind me, but don't scream. I will keep my hand on your mouth." Mark shined his flashlight behind Julius, and I heard a muffled scream come out of Mark. I looked into the same direction and saw a basement door and something like yellow fur hanging out of the door. We all looked towards each other, and the 5 of us slowly and quietly got out of the cabin. And after we were out of the cabin, we started running towards our bikes. In 15 minutes, we arrived in town and stayed at Mark's house so that we can be safe. The next week, Timmy reported what he saw to his parents, and that night, when the 5 of us were about to head to the cabin again, we saw multiple police cars and multiple ambulance cars on the path to the forest. We saw 19 bodies wheeled out of the forest and placed onto the ambulance cars. We saw Miss Williams in handcuffs screaming many things, and when she was placed into the police car, she shot us a weak smile, worry appearing on her face. She wore a yellow body fursuit. Please be kind to other people. You don't know what they are going through. Showing kindness to them can help them. I had a nightmare I had once before. As a kid, I had nightmares every single night. I thought this was normal, so I never said anything to anyone. Never mind the fact that my most memorable nightmares were of me being eaten alive. I've read some theories about why this is, but none of them really resonate with me. These nightmares in which I'd be consumed by a different creature lead to an irrational fear of being eaten alive. I don't like aliens or skeletons or witches because I dreamt of both eating me on different occasions. Even as an adult, they scare me, and I can't watch movies with any of these things. No aliens, no Army of Darkness, no Hocus Pocus, no Twitches, no The Craft, or anything like it. I also had recurring dreams, meaning I'd repeat a dream I had before. I recently had a nightmare that I had once before when I was younger. I had gotten off of work late one day, my body ached, and I deeply regretted agreeing when my manager asked me to stay longer, but I needed the money. By the time I was crawling into bed, I felt the exhaustion, and I knew I'd fall asleep fast, which I did. It didn't take long for a nightmare to start. But this nightmare all too familiar, one that stuck out as the scariest of my childhood. I was at a carnival of some sort in the forest. The world was bright and cheery, and everything was free. I was young, probably 5 or 6, and my mom was with me. And at each stand, I was given free toys. I don't remember most of them, but I know the one I was most excited about was a cotton candy machine. I was being gifted so much that we were carrying it all in trash bags, both of us holding 2 trash bags each, but somehow none of it felt heavy. There was a merry-go-round and a Ferris wheel in the distance, other kids running around, and everyone felt joyful. When suddenly, all the other families were gone. It was just me, my mom, and the folk that worked there. The world lost saturation, and the comfortable warmth became an eerie chill. I felt something shaking in the trash bags and looked to see thousands of spiders, worms, and centipedes crawling out. I screamed and dropped the bags and looked up to see my mom had been consumed by the bugs, leaving her nothing more than a skeleton. I turned to the carnival workers and saw they were all staring at me with horrifying smiles, showing hundreds of sharp teeth stained with what looked like blood and dirt. This is where my nightmare differs from when I was a kid. When I first had this dream, all the carnival workers lunged at me before consuming my flesh. Somehow I was still conscious, feeling every little bit of pain as they ripped me apart. When they were done, I was left as a skeleton as well. The carnival would then disappear, leaving my skeleton alone in the woods, unable to move, unaware of if my mom was next to me or not, as I couldn't turn my head to look. It felt like forever before I'd eventually wake up. As an adult who had constant nightmares, I learned to do whatever it took to avoid the horrible end of a nightmare, especially if I knew I'd be eaten alive. When I can tell there's no escape, I find some way to kill myself in the dream so I can wake up. Sometimes the nature of the dream means I'd have a weapon, but most of the time my only option is to break my own neck. And that's what I did to avoid the pain of being eaten alive again. When I woke up, I saw only an hour had passed since I first fell asleep. I scrolled through TikTok because there was no way in hell I was falling back asleep now. I spent hours scrolling away, slowly releasing the fear I held so tightly too. But by the time I felt like I could finally fall back asleep, I saw the sun shining in the window and realized it was about time to get up for the day. I sluggishly got ready for work and headed out the door. Days like this, I was thankful for working in a coffee shop. Although drinking caffeine to make up for only getting 1 hour of sleep is about as effective as putting a Band-Aid on a stab wound. And it was a Monday, which means everyone is grumpy and customers are ruder, because everyone hates Mondays and blames the barista when $1.06 coffee doesn't solve all their problems. At least I only had a short shift today. By the time it was over, I felt sick from lack of sleep. The bus ride home was agony. I found myself fighting sleep, worried I'd miss my stop. Eventually, I lost that fight. I woke up when the road turned from asphalt to gravel. I knew immediately I was past my stop and I'd have to catch another bus back home. But I figured I couldn't have been that far. But then I got off the bus and saw the carnival in the woods. As I walked towards the carnival, suddenly I felt myself getting smaller and smaller until I felt a hand grab mine. I looked up to see my mom, and soon I was gifted that cotton candy machine. Somehow I felt safe again, like it wouldn't turn bad this time, but then it did. And right before I was pounced on, and I was going to snap my neck to wake myself up, I was shook awake by a coworker on my bus that noticed I fell asleep. We were at my stop. I thanked the driver as I hurried off the bus and down the street to my house. I've never fallen asleep on the bus before, and now I have had this dream twice in a row after having it once like 17 years ago. I didn't feel safe in my own mind, but my body was desperate for sleep, and I passed out the moment I hit my bed despite my fears, and I was pleasantly shocked when I woke up the next morning feeling well rested, having not had the nightmare. I figured maybe having the dream again was triggered by something. Maybe I saw a flyer for a carnival or a picture of a Ferris wheel, and my subconscious remembered the dream and replayed it. Whatever it was, I was ready to put it past me. I headed to work and had another boring day of making lattes that cost just about as much as I make in an hour. It was another shorter shift, so I decided to treat myself to froyo from the local shop next door before catching the bus home. I tried a seasonal strawberry daiquiri flavor. I took too big a bite and got a brain freeze. I remember the cold chill it gave me so vividly. I headed home, had dinner, and headed to bed. I awoke the next morning, thankful that I had the day off and could sleep in. I checked my phone to see a text from my friend Adeline, a new mom to Sapphire, a beautiful little girl. She was inviting me over, an invite I gladly accepted. Within 10 minutes, I was ready, and she was picking me up. Sapphire cooed at us from her car seat. The ride seemed to go on for a while. Eventually, Adeline stopped the car at the end of a gravel road. "Come with me, Beck," she said as she stepped out of the car. I got out too, and she quickly grabbed my hand before dragging me out into the forest with her. I turned my head back to the car and tried to stop her. "Wait, what about Sapphire?" She clicked the button on her keys to lock the doors and kept running, pulling me behind. I tried to protest, not wanting to leave an infant in a car unattended, but she was unnaturally strong. I was shocked she was so okay with leaving her behind, but then I saw that damn circus again. I didn't even remember falling asleep. I shrunk. Adeline morphed into my mom, and you know the rest. I snapped my neck, and I awoke in my bedroom. I checked the time, 5 a.m., and figured I must have dreamt of going out with Adeline. Then I noticed the day. It was only Tuesday. I dreamt an entire day of work, and a portion of the following day before it became my nightmare. I dreamt the frozen yogurt, the brain freeze, the peaceful sleep, the drive, everything. I felt like I was going crazy. Over the course of the next month, it kept happening, and the length of my dream got longer and longer. Eventually, I was dreaming a whole year ahead. I dreamt of meeting someone, falling in love, and meeting their family. Their name was Reagan. They had a beautiful smile that lit up a room. Their outgoing, optimistic personality perfectly complemented my shy pessimism. We even moved in together and adopted a small dog named Seymour. We both loved Little Shop of Horror, but they weren't real. None of it was real. 3 weeks into living together, I opened the front door of our apartment to find myself back at the carnival. The doorknob became my mother's hand, and I was faced with the reality that very little time had actually passed. When I woke up, I cried, mourning a life that never was. I wanted to tell someone about what was happening, but how do you explain this? As I write this, it's been a month since the first, or I guess second time I had the dream, and it feels like it's been years since then. I tried desperately to stay awake to avoid dreaming of a life that's then ripped from me. But for what? Maybe Reagan and Seymour are real, and they are waiting for me. I hear them calling me home. The nightmare only comes when I wake up, so maybe I just need to make sure I don't wake up. The thought crosses my mind that maybe I could get stuck in the nightmare, unable to force myself awake, but Reagan wouldn't lead me astray. I hear their whispers in the wind. I smell the corn dogs and funnel cakes. Did I mention Reagan works a food stand? They never said where, but that's not important. What's important is me getting back to my love. I just hope breaking my neck is as easy as it is in my nightmares. It came from Alexis's basement. Since my wife's tragic death, my life has become a mess. Everything reminded me of her and the way her existence stopped. Before I knew it, I was an alcoholic with no job, no friends, and no happiness. She was pregnant. My eyes filled with tears of joy when she announced it. I was going to be a dad. I was going to have a kid. Weeks later, we discovered it was a boy. I was going to raise him, teach him, and bring him in my little adventures. The day it happened, all that was lost. When the police officer knocked at my door and told me what happened, I just saw him pulling out his gun and shooting me in the chest. I know it wasn't anyone's fault, and that never happened. Then, a second later, I thought about my son. The bullet went directly through my skull this time. I would have preferred for it to be a real bullet than a metaphorical one. My life ended since that day. It used to. That was until I met Alexis. My life was falling apart, and there was something I could do. Something I did. I found this little house in Oregon, in a small rural neighborhood. I found a job at a construction company in the area. It was the perfect opportunity to leave my past behind and move on. Finally turn the page. I got along with my new coworkers really well, in fact. After work, we had the tendency to go to the bar together and drink a cold beer while chatting. That was when I saw him, sitting alone in a corner, drinking beer after beer, with an angry and sad look on his face. He must have been in his 50s. His name was Alexis. I don't remember how and why we started talking, but we did. We realized we both lived in the same neighborhood. I didn't have the time to meet everyone since I was still pretty occupied with the furniture and the boxes lying around in my almost empty house. And that is probably why I hadn't met him yet. He seemed happy to have a friend. I never noticed him really interacting with anyone except me. At that time, I was still pretty shook with my wife's death, and I was surprised to know Alexis had a similar experience. His wife and kids had been victims of a burglary 3 years ago. He had found them dead when he got back from a long day at work. From the missing items and blood all over, it was determined that they had been the victims of a burglary. The burglar supposedly stabbed his wife multiple times in the chest after she noticed him. Then, he did the same thing to his 2 kids. I felt deeply sorry for him. That explained why he didn't look like he was having a great time. The months passed, and I got to know Alexis pretty well. He invited me to his barbecues to talk and grill meat. I found it very odd the fact that nobody was there except the 2 of us most of the time. His or my neighbors would occasionally join in, but it wasn't common. He lived in this medium 2-story house with a basement. It was nice, but I could see him looking at the empty rooms his wife and kids used to live in with a great pain in his eyes. That was part of why I moved to another state. One day, while we were chatting in his backyard on 2 typical white plastic chairs, we ran out of our cold alcoholic beverages. Alexis told me that there was some left in the basement fridge. He asked me if I could get them while he prepared some meat for the barbecue. The entrance to his basement was a trapdoor on the floor of a small closet. I went down and immediately noticed his basement was very cold. I know hot air goes to the top and cold air sinks, so it was pretty normal, but I didn't imagine it could be this intense. The temperature must have been 10 degrees Celsius below the temperature of his house. He told me the fridge was behind the stairs, close to the washing machine, and that I shouldn't go into the dark room in the corner because there was the water heater and all sorts of pipes. I felt like I was being watched, like a bad energy was infiltrating my skin the more I had my back turned. I grabbed the pack of beers and got out of there as quickly as I could, right when I was about to close the trapdoor. I swear I heard something coming from the basement. It was almost inaudible, but I was sure I heard a faint whisper. I may have simply been an illusion. Noise coming from the pipes. Life continued like that for a few years. Me and Alexis would hang out at his place, at my place. One unusual thing I noticed is that whenever he would come to my house on the weekend, the coworkers that I invited had the tendency to come up with an excuse to not go. I knew something was up, but didn't want to accuse my coworkers of being liars and trying to escape me or him. I remember in September, I asked him for help with my car because it was not working properly. Alexis was a mechanic. I knew I could get some help from him for a low price, possibly even for free. He told me he had to go visit someone for the weekend and that it wasn't possible. The next few days, his house seemed to be empty like he said it would be because he was supposed to be out of town, but his car was there. His car had not moved an inch. When I asked him about that when he got back, he told me he used his bike because it wasn't far from our little town. I believed him. Alexis was like that. Sometimes there were little odd details with him that weren't important, but very strange. 5 years after I moved in, Alexis died. The police found his body rotting in his basement after they got a complaint of a horrible smell coming from his house. I was sad after that. He wasn't my only friend, but he was the only one I could trust and the only one that could really understand me. He committed suicide. He was hanging from a rope when they found him. That made it even worse. I thought I had restored his happiness by giving him company. Apparently, it wasn't the case. After I saw the lights coming from the police cars, I went to investigate. That's when I heard the news. The police officers asked me all kinds of questions. I was pretty much the only one to interrogate since I was Alexis's only friend. The police concluded it was a suicide pretty quickly. He was in a state of decomposition when they found him, but there were visible marks on his body. A mark on his neck from the rope, but also cuts on his stomach and arms, deep cuts. The police didn't pay attention to this crucial piece of information. They didn't seem to want to find the cause of his death. 2 days later, it was declared he had killed himself, almost like the police wanted to move on and forget that case. My sense of hearing caught something truly bizarre when the police were asking me questions. I heard the detective say, "I don't understand. The cuts on his chest are the same his wife had when they found her. The exact same. I'm not sure if I want to understand after all." Because he had no family and no friends. I got everything he had. His money, car, and house. I sold everything except the house. I wanted to inspect it and renovate it before selling it. That's what I did. I hired someone to inspect everything and to make sure the house is clean. Everything was going fine until he told me there was a strange smell coming from the basement. I went in there with him to find the source of that odor. It didn't take long. The horrible scent guided us to the corner room where there were pipes and the water heater. The door was wide open. I never went to the basement after his death, so it was a surprise. It was more than wide open. The door was barely attached, and the wood was broken. There was a big hole on the side of it, and a part of the wall had been damaged too. The light in the room was broken. There were glass shards everywhere. I brought a flashlight and we started looking around. To my surprise, there were no pipes and certainly no water heater. There was debris on the floor, a plate with a brown substance and chains. The smell probably came from the plate. I grabbed it and threw it in the trash before washing my hands. After the inspection, I used the money I got from selling all Alexis's belongings to renovate the whole house. I could do it by myself since I'm a construction worker, but I was seriously overwhelmed with a sense of danger in that house. I paid a good friend of mine that worked at the construction company to do the job with me. Everything went well until we got to the basement. It was old and dirty. It smelled like cat piss, if I'm going to be honest. Alexis clearly did a bad job at cleaning it, but I can't blame him. He had to endure so much. We demolished the walls of the room to create a big one-room basement. My coworker looked very stressed out. During the basement renovation, he had a weird look on his face and was shaking. He would sometimes drop his tools or spill his water. Eventually, he left and never came back, claiming he was sick and needed a break. I decided it was best to sell the house like it was at that moment. Nobody was going to help me with it anyway. People seemed to never talk about Alexis, even when he was alive. I would mention him in conversations, and people would find excuses to get out and leave. They were certainly not going to go into his house. I sold it as a finished 2-story house with an unfinished basement. A young couple with a 3-month-old daughter moved in quickly enough. They seemed happy to get this house for such a small price. Because of the unfinished basement, I lowered the price quite a bit. Johnny Roger, the young dad, said it wasn't a problem and that he would find time to renovate it himself and transform it into a storage basement for his hunting equipment. One thing I have to mention is that our street was surrounded by woods and Alexis's property had a big part of the forest. It was perfect for the couple. One reason why they moved in so quickly. After a month had passed, I was woken up by a knock on the door. It was Johnny. He asked me if people normally went on Alexis's property. I told him it was very rare, and he explained that he saw a man in the forest while he was setting up a tent. The man was far away, and the trees were hiding him, so it could have been anyone. Johnny tried to call out the person, but he ran away. I reassured him by telling him it was probably just teens trying to make a bad joke by trying to scare him. The next week, it continued. He would come to my house at random hours of the day while I wasn't working and complain about noises or dark figures in the woods. I was fed up with this disturbance, so I told him to meet up at his house at 11 p.m. He greeted me with the weirdest smile ever. I could sense something wasn't right by looking at his watery eyes. We sat on plastic chairs and looked at the forest from his backyard. That reminded me of the time I spent with Alexis. I tried to not get overcome with sadness and nostalgia and got up and told Johnny to go into the woods to check if anything is out of the ordinary. He clearly didn't want to, but agreed anyway since he needed answers. It was calm, a bit too calm. I wasn't hearing any crickets or any birds. The tall, dark trees stood there like silent observers watching us venture into the forest. Then it became even more quiet. Johnny had stopped moving. I didn't hear the branches breaking under his feet anymore. I called out his name, then I turned around and saw him. He was frozen in place looking at the distance without making a sound. I silently joined him and looked at where he was staring. "It's not a man," he whispered. "What do you mean?" There was a small clearing 200 feet away from us. The moon shined at the moss, and what was standing on the moss? It must have been 8 feet tall. I think we made too much noise because it turned its head and looked at us. Its body was hairy and his face covered in scars. Its eyes were 2 black spots illuminated by the gentle light. It had enormous teeth coming out of its mouth. It had claws, and I could see a dark substance on them. The thing that surprised me the most were the broken chains at its wrists, just like the ones in Alexis's basement. The lawman. Hello, folks. I have to tell you something that I've done recently, and as to why I did it. The lawman is at fault. I'm not. The lawman has been after me and my family for years, decades even. It goes back to when I was just a young boy, around 4. But I only vaguely remember running around a lot, and my uncles and aunts vanishing without a trace. I was told later on by my parents that they either left us to save themselves or died. They weren't exactly doing legal stuff, but the way I was told by my father, they were all killed in gruesome ways. All thanks to that damn lawman. If you thought that was vague, I only remember so little after me, and my family were forced to leave after a swarm of lawmen killed and destroyed our camp, our uncles, aunts, and even hurt my father during the chaos. I remember us being nomads for a long time, and at one point, we were at the Yukon trying to strike gold cleanly, but my parents didn't exactly strike gold to say the least. Thankfully, when I was 12, we finally settled on a ranch just outside of town. My father met up with my uncle and someone else that I can't remember, other than the fact that he was a native and black, to build the ranch, and later paid it off with some gold and money he found, although my mother wasn't happy about the way he acquired it. My uncle stayed with us, but not the other man, since my father told me that he went to go to Canada to start a family there. I thought we were finally free from the troubles after that, but when I was 16, we got a visit from the lawman again. This time, he arrested me and my parents, and I was put in a prison cell along with my mother. As for my father, he was used as a tool, and he was forced against his will to kill and hunt down the rest of his former crew. Meanwhile, all me and my mother could do was just wait in our cells. Some other prisoners, and even prison guards, would try to hit on my mother, although she would make it extremely clear that she wasn't interested at all. Either that be she'd yelled at them, or slapped them silly to make them go away. One day, me and my mother were just sent back to the ranch and told that my father would come home soon. In the meantime, I started to teach myself how to shoot a pistol, a revolver, and rifles, just to show my dad that I could help him, and also for self-defense. in case someone were to try and rob me or something of the sort. Finally, my dad came home and was very glad to see me and my mother, although she was annoyed with him because of what happened, and my father scolded my uncle for not taking care of the ranch all that much. A few days after that, I showed my father my gun skills, although he told me that I shouldn't follow in his footsteps, and seemed to be disappointed. Furious, I left for the woods near my house and decided to go hunt for a bear. Although that ended in disaster, but my dad was able to find me before I got mauled by a bear. But I got scolded by him, saying that it was a reckless thing to do. However, a few days after that whole mess, I was in the barn talking to my dad about these new machines that could fly and that they could turn men into angels. But my dad repeated what I said in a very grim way that I can't quite describe. Then suddenly, my uncle told my dad to come quick. My uncle then showed him what he saw, and my father told me to go inside quick and to stay there, regardless of what happens. I then said, okay, before my father hugged me and told me to lock the doors and to protect my mother. Once I got inside, I heard gunshots, and after a few minutes, my dad went inside to check on us. I got my rifle and asked him what happened, to which he said more was coming and to stay inside. I refused and went outside to help. My mother tried to stop me, but I insisted that I needed to help. I then got outside and saw a whole bunch of soldiers that were after us. I asked if they were going to kill us, to which my dad said he wasn't going to let that happen. Then, after a few minutes, my uncle was shot in the chest. He fell to the ground and was in very serious pain. My dad went to go check up on him after the soldiers were reloading, to which my uncle said to forget about him and to get me and my mother out of the ranch before he just went limp. Those bastards, that lawman, he's dead because of him. My dad then protected me and my mother as we went to the barn to get a horse so we could ride out. Me and my mother got on one of the horses before my dad that he'll meet up with us, but not before saying that he loved us dearly. I then rode out as fast as I could, avoiding the army at all costs, although they appeared to let us go. As I was riding out, I heard a barrage of gunshots, followed by a haunting silence. Me and my mother knew that we had to turn around, and we returned to the ranch only to find that the soldiers and lawmen were gone, and my dad was dead. He was shot relentless dozens of times outside of the barn. My mother cried uncontrollably, and we buried him and my uncle together, and I hugged my mother after, trying to comfort her. I knew damn well that it was that lawman's doing. My father did everything he was told, only to be disposed of like that. To hell with him. For the next 3 years, I took care of my mother and the ranch, along with teaching myself more of how to shoot guns. My mother's depression continued to get worse and worse, until sadly, when I was 19, she died in her sleep. I buried her along with my father and uncle. After burying her, I put on my father's hat and went into the nearby town. I was going to make that damn lawman pay for what he's done to me and my family. I saw a government agent in town and asked if he worked for the lawman, to which he responded that he worked for him in the past and asked why. I responded that I had a letter to give him. He then told where he lived, alongside his wife. I then went to his house, only to be told by his wife that he went to go shoot ducks with a friend of his. But she thankfully told me where he was after I told her that I had to give him a letter. I found his campsite where his friend was at and didn't see him. I asked his friend where he was, and he told me that he was just down straight away. I then walked straight for a bit before I saw him at the river shooting ducks relentless, just like what he did to my father. This is it. He's as good as dead. That bastard's gonna get what he deserved, a bullet to the brain and to his empty heart, all to avenge my family. I then checked my revolvers to make sure they were fully loaded. Once I checked, I then asked him if he was the lawman, to which he responded, "Do I know you?" And finally I said, "Forgive me for startling you, sir. I have a message for you." My name is Jack Marston. You knew my father.
The woods have eyes. I bet there's a lot of readers that may love to go out camping like I do, right? Well, with this story, I'm about to tell you changed my way of camping forever. It started on a hot summer with some friends on a camping trip in the woods of Florida. Yes, you can camp in Florida also, folks. Anywho, we get to our destination to camp. As we're still on the road to the site, we came across an entrance that was blocked off saying, "Stay away, no trespassing." I've pointed out to my friends that entrance, and what a mistake that was, because they are the most curious people I've known. You tell them not to go there, and they will go anyway. So we arrived at our destination, and as soon as we got off the truck, they insisted to investigate the enclosed area and wanted me to tag along. I insisted not to, but they convinced me it'll be fun and exciting. So I thought, to my luck, they wanted to go after dusk. Yay. Here we are walking on the dirt road from our site to the closed road and hiked in. All I've noticed once entering the area were the trees. They seemed dry and white, like someone just sucked the life out of it. We kept walking and saw an abandoned campsite. We thought there could be some goods we can take back to our camp, but there is nothing to take. Suddenly, we hear a deep voice saying, "Get out now." We looked around scared and couldn't see anything in the darkness. We obviously had a flashlight with us, but we're no good if we can't see the idiot trying to scare us. So we tried to backtrack back to our campsite and realized we were walking in circles lost. I was like, ooh, hello, nah, I'm getting lost with these idiots, man. But yay, I did. Then another voice said, "We warned you, damn, give me a chance to get out. We are lost here, hello." Instead of giving us a damn warning, why don't you be useful and guide us out, you fool? After I shouted that, only silence crept the night. Disappointed, we kept on walking. It seemed like hours we walked and going nowhere. There were 5 of us in the group and noticed that one of my friends went missing. We looked all over the place and no sign of him. We shouted his name and no answer. We couldn't explain how he disappeared from us, but he did. And one of the guys speaks out and said that he heard that people goes missing from this area and never been seen again. Then I yelled at him, telling him, "Don't you think you should have told us that shit before trespassing this area, knowing the fact people goes missing, you ass?" "I'm sorry, I thought it was just some fake ass story to keep people out," he said. When I was done arguing with him, I've noticed again that someone else went missing. Now we're down to 3 from 5 people, and I'm thinking to myself, oh shit, this reminds me of Predator. We're being hunted, y'all. Watch out for the red light, man. It's a laser. Then we heard another voice said, "You can't escape from us." Chills came down my spine when I heard that, and kept on walking on the dirt road that we presumably thought was the path. But when we kept following it, there was a dead end with those trees in the way. Ugly white dried up trees. Looked carefully at a tree and told the guys I saw something move. And when looked close, it opened its eyes. I jumped and screamed like a bitch when I saw that and asked the guys did they see that, and replied yes. We ran from it to the deserted campsite. That was the only thing we can get to, and figured out the problem were the damn trees. It seemed that they were alive for some reason. Didn't care how or why, I just wanted to get out of that area ASAP. And to top it, was getting colder than night. Luckily, I had some matches to start a fire. As soon as I've light the match, a loud scream from all around saying, "Turn it off." So we came to the conclusion that these things or trees didn't like fire at all. So I thought, oh, your asses are so fucked, not by it. I grabbed a lot of sticks from the bonfire where the old camping site was and turned them on. While the screams that came after we lit the wood on fire, it was like being in a stadium full of demons screaming in agony, and I screamed back saying, "Bitch, please, I haven't even touched you yet, pussies." We figured out since we have this fire, we should walk back on the dirt road and see if those trees would move, or we can just burn them for fun then. As we walked towards the dead end, the path was open. We started to run out until exiting the area completely. I know for a fact that no one other than us who has witnessed this event would ever believe us. But I'm glad to be alive and escaped with the 2 remaining friends. We mourned for the lost ones for a while and moved on. Please, if an area says don't enter, then don't fucking enter. There's a damn reason it's there in the first place.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling content.